Captain Zara Chen moved through the abandoned research station with practiced silence, her boots making no sound on the metal floor. Behind her, 5 young Kitharan warriors followed in a tight formation, their golden eyes wide with curiosity and barely contained fear. The cubs, as she had started thinking of them, were supposed to be observing human combat techniques for their training program. What they were actually witnessing was something far more significant. The station had been overrun by void crawlers 3 days ago. These creatures were the nightmare of every spacefaring species in the galaxy. Black, chitinous beasts that could survive in the vacuum of space and tear through starship hulls with their razor-sharp claws. Most species evacuated immediately when crawlers were detected. Humans, however, had a different approach. Zara pressed herself against a corridor wall and held up her hand, signaling the cubs to stop. Through the darkness ahead, she could hear the distinctive clicking sound of crawler communication. Her enhanced hearing, a standard modification for human soldiers, picked up at least 6 different voices, a full hunting pack. The youngest cub, barely past his naming ceremony, whispered something in the Kitharan language. His older companion quickly shushed him, but Zara had caught the words. He had asked if they should call for backup. The question revealed how little other species understood about human military doctrine. Backup wasn't coming. This wasn't because the human fleet had abandoned them, but because Zara had specifically requested to handle this alone. The Galactic Council had spent months debating whether to send a full battle group to deal with the crawler infestation. Humans had offered a simpler solution. 1 soldier, standard equipment, 12 hours. The cubs watched as Zara checked her weapon, a simple kinetic rifle that most alien species considered primitive. No energy shields, no plasma cannons, no gravity manipulators, just a gun that fired metal projectiles at high velocity. They had studied human weapons in their tactical classes and found them puzzling. Why would a species capable of faster-than-light travel still rely on such basic technology? A crawler rounded the corner ahead, its 8 legs moving in perfect coordination. It stood nearly 3 meters tall with mandibles that could snap a Kitharan in half. The cubs tensed, ready to flee or fight, their hands moving to their ceremonial weapons. But Zara simply raised her rifle and fired 3 times in rapid succession. The first shot took out the creature's primary visual sensor. The second shattered its left forward leg. The third punched through its cranial cavity, dropping it instantly. The entire engagement lasted less than 2 seconds. What struck the cubs wasn't the efficiency of the kill, but Zara's complete lack of emotion. No battle cry, no fear response, no celebration. She simply confirmed the target was dead and continued forward. This wasn't the behavior they expected from a warrior. In Kitharan culture, combat was an emotional experience, full of honor and glory and righteous fury. As they moved deeper into the station, the cubs began to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Zara wasn't hunting the crawlers in the traditional sense. She was systematically clearing them out room by room, with a methodical precision that seemed almost mechanical. Each encounter followed the same pattern: identify, engage, eliminate, advance. The station's main laboratory had been converted into a crawler nest. Dozens of the creatures had made their home among the shattered equipment and ruined research materials. This should have been impossible for a single soldier to handle. The cubs expected Zara to call for orbital bombardment, or at least request heavy weapons support. Instead, she spent 10 minutes studying the nest layout through a partially opened door. She made notes on a simple electronic pad, marking positions and movement patterns. When she was finished, she turned to the cubs and spoke in perfect Kitharan. Your species believes that courage means facing death without fear. You sing songs about warriors who charge into battle knowing they will not return. This is admirable, but it is not human courage. The eldest cub, who bore the scars of his first hunt, asked what human courage meant. Zara smiled, and for the first time since they had met her, the cubs saw something other than cold professionalism in her expression. Human courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something else is more important than fear. She sealed her helmet and checked her weapon one final time. Watch carefully. Your instructors will want a detailed report. Then she opened the door and walked into the nest alone, beginning the most extraordinary combat display the young Kitharans had ever witnessed. They watched in absolute silence, finally beginning to understand why humans had become the most feared warriors in the galaxy. The nest erupted into chaos the moment Zara stepped inside. 23 void crawlers by the cub's count, all turning toward the intruder with deadly precision. Any other species would have been overwhelmed in seconds. The cubs pressed themselves against the observation window, their hearts hammering with a mixture of terror and fascination. Zara moved like liquid metal through the nest, never staying in one position for more than a heartbeat. The cubs had studied human anatomy in their xenobiology classes. They knew humans were physically inferior to most galactic species, slower than Kitherans, weaker than bulwarks, less armored than sentinel-class beings. Yet somehow Zara was dancing between creatures that could have torn her apart with casual ease. She used the nest against itself. When 3 crawlers converged on her position, she ducked beneath a suspended research platform, forcing them to approach single file. Her rifle barked twice and 2 creatures fell. The third leaped over its fallen packmates, mandibles spread wide. Zara rolled sideways, came up firing, and put a round through its thorax before it could land. The youngest cub whispered a question that the others were all thinking. How was she moving so fast? Kitheran warriors were renowned for their speed and agility, but they moved in straight lines, direct approaches that honored their prey. Zara moved like water, finding the fastest path downhill, never fighting the terrain but using it as a weapon. A group of crawlers tried to surround her near the nest's center. Instead of breaking through their circle, Zara dropped to the ground and rolled beneath one of the creatures coming up behind it. Her combat knife appeared in her left hand. When had she drawn it? And she drove it into the soft joint where the creature's leg met its body. The crawler stumbled, creating a gap in their formation that she slipped through like smoke. The cubs began to notice patterns in her movement. Every action served multiple purposes. When she fired at one crawler, she positioned herself so the shot would also disable a piece of equipment that another creature was using for cover. When she rolled to avoid an attack, she always rolled toward better tactical position, never just away from danger. But it was her eyes that truly unsettled the young Kitherans. Throughout the entire engagement, Zara's eyes never stopped moving. She was tracking every crawler in the room, calculating angles and distances, predicting their movements 3 steps ahead. It was like watching someone play a game where only she knew all the rules. A massive crawler, easily the largest in the nest, charged at her from across the room. Its 8 legs pounded against the metal floor like thunder. The cubs could see its muscles bunching beneath its carapace as it prepared to leap. Any reasonable warrior would have fled or sought cover. Zara stood perfectly still and raised her rifle. She fired once, hitting the creature in its left eye. The shot didn't kill it, but it caused the crawler to veer slightly to the left, exactly as Zara had intended. The creature crashed into a support beam that she had identified as structurally compromised during her initial survey. The beam collapsed, bringing down a section of ceiling that crushed 2 other crawlers who had been positioning themselves above her. The cubs exchanged glances. That had been planned. She had planned for a creature she had never seen before to charge at her in exactly the right way to bring down that specific section of ceiling. How could any mind work that quickly? As the battle continued, they began to understand something their instructors had never explained. Human warfare wasn't about strength or speed or superior technology. It was about intelligence applied with ruthless efficiency. Every human weapon was designed to maximize the advantage of their greatest natural gift, their ability to think, adapt, and plan under pressure. Zara's rifle held 30 rounds. The cubs had counted. She had fired 27 times and hadn't missed once. 3 rounds remained, and there were 4 crawlers left in the nest. The mathematics of the situation should have been impossible, but Zara had already solved the equation. She fired her 28th round into a fuel tank for the station's emergency systems. The explosion created a wall of flame that separated 2 crawlers from the other 2. She used her 29th round to trigger a secondary explosion that collapsed another section of ceiling. Now there was only 1 crawler left with a clear path to her. The final creature was the smartest of the pack. It had learned from watching its nestmates die, and it approached carefully, using cover and changing direction unpredictably. The cubs held their breath as it stalked closer to Zara's position. She fired her last round straight into the air. The cubs stared in confusion until they heard the sound of metal striking metal high above. Zara had shot a cable supporting a piece of heavy equipment. The machinery fell like a hammer from the gods, crushing the final crawler beneath tons of twisted metal. 30 rounds, 23 crawlers. 7 shots that had modified the environment itself to become her weapon. Not one wasted bullet. Zara calmly reloaded her rifle and began walking toward the exit. As she passed the observation window, she looked directly at the cubs and nodded once. The gesture was simple, professional, almost casual. The young Kitherans remained frozen in place for several minutes after she disappeared from view, trying to process what they had witnessed. Finally, the eldest spoke. "I think," he said slowly, "we need to completely rewrite our combat manuals." The cubs found Zara in the station's medical bay, tending to a wounded researcher who had been hiding in a supply closet for 3 days. The Albanian scientist was delirious with fear and dehydration, babbling in his native language about the monsters in the dark. Zara spoke to him in perfect Albanian, her voice gentle and reassuring as she administered medical aid. This was the same woman who had just methodically slaughtered 23 apex predators without breaking a sweat. Now she was carefully adjusting an IV drip and checking the researcher's vital signs with the precise movements of a trained medic. The transformation was so complete that the cubs wondered if they were looking at the same person. "Why do you help him?" the youngest cub asked. In Kitharan culture, warriors were warriors and healers were healers. The two roles were considered fundamentally incompatible. How could someone who killed so efficiently also show such care for the wounded? Zara continued working as she answered, "Because that's what we do. We eliminate threats so that others can live safely. The killing isn't the purpose, it's just a tool." She finished with the researcher and began checking the medical bay for additional survivors. Her movements were different now, careful and deliberate where they had been lightning fast during combat. The cubs realized she wasn't the same person in different situations. She was adapting her entire personality to match the requirements of her current task. As they searched the station together, the cubs began asking questions about human military doctrine. They had expected to learn about weapons and tactics. Instead, they found themselves receiving an education in philosophy. "Your species fights for honor," Zara explained as they checked another empty room. "It's beautiful in its way, but honor is a luxury that requires survival. Humans fight for continuation, our own, our families, our species. Everything else is secondary." The second eldest cub asked about the human concept of rules of war. His instructors had taught him that all civilized species followed certain protocols during combat. No targeting of medical facilities, no weapons of mass destruction against civilian populations, no torture of prisoners. Surely humans, as members of the Galactic Council, followed these same rules. Zara's expression grew distant. "We follow the rules when our enemies do. When they don't..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Humans have a saying, when fighting monsters, be careful not to become a monster yourself. But sometimes, becoming a monster is exactly what's required to protect those who cannot protect themselves." The cubs exchanged worried glances. This was not what they had expected to hear from a representative of a council species. Most galactic civilizations believed in absolute moral principles that applied regardless of circumstances. The idea that ethics could be situational was deeply disturbing. They found more survivors in the lower levels of the station, a family of Tyrellian traders who had been trapped when the crawlers first attacked. The children were barely old enough to walk, and their parents were injured and exhausted. Zara immediately took charge, organizing the evacuation with the same efficiency she had shown in combat. But the cubs noticed something else. When one of the Tyrellian children approached her, showing no fear of the armored human soldier, Zara's entire demeanor changed. She knelt down to the child's level, removed her helmet and smiled with genuine warmth. She spoke to the little one in simple Tyrellian, telling a joke that made the child giggle despite everything that had happened. This was the third completely different person the cubs had seen inhabiting the same body. The efficient killer, the professional soldier, and now the gentle protector. How many versions of herself did one human contain? As they made their way toward the evacuation point, the eldest cub asked the question that had been bothering him since the nest fight. "Captain Chen, how did you know the creatures would behave exactly as they did? How could you plan for something you had never encountered before?" Zara considered this for a long moment. "We couldn't know. But we could make educated guesses based on biological imperatives and behavioral patterns. Then we prepared for multiple contingencies and adapted when our predictions proved incorrect. But you were never incorrect. I was wrong about 17 different things during that engagement. Zara replied matter-of-factly. I just adapted quickly enough that the mistakes didn't become fatal. The cubs had been taught that great warriors succeeded through strength, skill, and courage. The idea that someone could succeed by being wrong and adapting was a completely foreign concept. In Kithaeron culture, making mistakes in combat was shameful. Leaders were expected to be perfect, to always know the right course of action. Human commanders make decisions with incomplete information all the time, Zara continued. We don't expect to be right. We expect to be flexible enough to change course when we're proven wrong. The ability to admit error and adapt is more valuable than being correct the first time. They reached the evacuation shuttles as the human fleet arrived in orbit. The cubs watched as Zara efficiently coordinated the rescue operations, transitioning seamlessly from warrior to medic to logistics coordinator. Each role required different skills, different personality traits, different ways of thinking. Yet she moved between them as easily as changing clothes. The youngest cub finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind since they first met her. Captain, what makes humans different from every other species in the galaxy? Zara looked out at the stars through the shuttle's viewport. Every other species we've met has one or maybe two exceptional traits. You Kithaerons are incredibly brave and fast. Alvanians are brilliant scientists. Bulwarks are incredibly strong. Tyrellians are natural diplomats. She turned back to the cubs. Humans aren't the best at anything specific, but we're adequate at everything, and we never stop trying to become better than adequate. As their shuttle departed from the station, the cubs sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything they had witnessed. They had come expecting to observe human combat techniques. Instead, they had been forced to confront the possibility that their entire understanding of warfare, leadership, and what it meant to be a warrior was fundamentally incomplete. The youngest cub stared out the window at the retreating station and whispered the question that would haunt all of their dreams. If that's what just one human can do, what happens when they decide to come for us? The journey back to the Kithaeron homeworld took 6 days through hyperspace. During that time, the cubs barely spoke to each other, each lost in their own thoughts about what they had witnessed. On the 4th day, the youngest finally broke the silence with a question that had been eating at him. Elder brother, he said to the oldest cub, what will we tell the Council of Claws? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The Council of Claws was the supreme military authority of the Kithaeron people, composed of the greatest warriors their species had ever produced. They had sent the cubs to observe human combat techniques so they could better understand their new allies. How could they explain that what they had witnessed challenged the very foundations of Kithaeron military philosophy? We tell them the truth, the eldest replied, though his voice lacked conviction. We tell them that humans are more dangerous than we ever imagined. The second eldest shook his head. They won't believe us. A single human clearing out 23 void crawlers, using primitive weapons, planning contingencies for creatures she'd never seen before. It sounds like fantasy. Then we show them the recordings, suggested the third cub. What recordings? The fourth asked. Did anyone think to document what we saw? The silence that followed answered the question. They had been so mesmerized by Zara's performance that none of them had thought to activate their recording equipment. They had no proof of what they claimed to have witnessed. Perhaps, the youngest said quietly, we should consider why we didn't record it. The others looked at him with curiosity. Despite his youth, he often saw things that his elders missed. We came expecting to see a demonstration of human military technology, he continued. Advanced weapons, superior tactics, better armor. Instead, we saw something that couldn't be recorded because it wasn't about equipment. It was about thinking. The eldest nodded slowly. You're right. But how do we explain that to the council? How do we tell them that humans don't win through superior strength or speed or technology, but through superior adaptation? More importantly, the second eldest added grimly, how do we explain that we've been preparing for the wrong kind of war? The cubs had been raised on stories of glorious battles where Kithaeron warriors faced overwhelming odds and prevailed through courage and skill. Their entire military doctrine was based on the assumption that superior individual prowess would triumph over numerical disadvantages. They trained for single combat, honorable duels, and decisive engagements where the better warrior would emerge victorious. But Zara had shown them a completely different approach to warfare. She hadn't fought the void crawlers in fair combat. She had used every advantage she could create or exploit, turning the environment itself into a weapon. She had fought smart rather than hard, efficient rather than heroic. The humans see war as a problem to be solved, the third cub observed. We see it as a test to be passed. That's what makes them dangerous, the fourth added. They don't care about honor or glory or proving themselves. They just care about winning. The youngest cub had been staring out the viewport at the swirling colors of hyperspace. Now he turned to his elder brothers with a troubled expression. I've been thinking about what Captain Chen said about humans not being the best at anything specific, but being adequate at everything. What if that's not entirely true? The others waited for him to continue. What if humans are the best at one thing and that one thing makes all the others irrelevant? What if they're the best at becoming whatever they need to become? The implications of this statement settled over the group like a shroud. If the youngest was correct, then humans weren't just another species with particular strengths and weaknesses. They were something far more dangerous, a species with no fixed limitations capable of adapting to meet any challenge. We've been asking the wrong question, the eldest said finally. We've been wondering how to report what we saw. We should be wondering how to prepare for what's coming. What do you mean? The second eldest asked. Think about it. We've been allies with humans for less than a year. We know almost nothing about their true capabilities or their long-term intentions. What we saw in that station, that was just one human responding to an immediate threat. What happens when they have time to plan? What happens when they decide that something needs to be changed in the galaxy? The cubs fell silent again, but this time their silence was different. Before, they had been processing what they had witnessed. Now they were confronting the possibility that they had seen only the tiniest glimpse of something much larger and more terrifying. The captain said something else, the youngest recalled. She said that humans fight for continuation. Not honor, not glory, not even victory. Continuation. What does that mean? The third cub answered with growing alarm in his voice. It means they'll do whatever it takes to survive and protect their own. No matter what the cost, no matter who gets in their way. And they're very good at figuring out what it takes, the fourth added. As their ship continued toward Kythera, the cubs began to understand that their mission had fundamentally changed. They had been sent to study human military techniques. Instead, they had discovered that humanity might represent an existential question for every other species in the galaxy. Not because humans were hostile, but because they were so adaptive that they could become anything they needed to become. The eldest looked around at his younger brothers, seeing his own fears reflected in their golden eyes. When we reach Kythera, he said slowly, we don't just report to the Council of Claws. We request an emergency session with the High Command. All of them. Because what we learned out there, it changes everything. The youngest cub nodded, but his attention was focused elsewhere. He was thinking about the moment when Zara had knelt down to speak with the Tyrellian child. The gentleness in her eyes, the warmth in her voice, the genuine care she had shown for a frightened alien child. That scared him more than anything else they had witnessed, because it meant that humans could be genuinely kind and protective, while simultaneously being the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. They could love their allies and destroy their enemies with equal sincerity. And the truly terrifying part was that he wasn't sure which category the Kytherans fell into. The emergency session of the Kytheran High Command convened in the Hall of Echoing Claws, a massive chamber carved from a single piece of black stone at the heart of their homeworld. Representatives from every major clan sat in judgment as the 5 cubs stood before them. Still wearing the simple travel clothes they had worn aboard their transport ship, war leader Thektar, scarred veteran of 100 battles, leaned forward in his ancient throne. His golden eyes held the same predatory intelligence that had made him the most feared warrior of his generation. You claim, his voice rumbled through the chamber, that a single human soldier eliminated an entire nest of void crawlers using only standard equipment. You further claim that this human demonstrated tactical capabilities that exceeded anything in our military doctrine. Yes, war leader, the eldest cub replied, his voice steady despite the weight of dozens of hostile stares. Without recording evidence. Yes, war leader. And based on this alleged observation, you request that we reconsider our entire military alliance with humanity. The eldest cub exchanged glances with his brothers. They had spent the entire journey home preparing for this moment. But standing before the assembled might of their people, their words seemed inadequate. War leader, the youngest cub stepped forward. With respect, we're not asking you to reconsider the alliance. We're asking you to understand what that alliance truly means. A murmur went through the chamber, for a cub barely passed his naming ceremony to address the High Command directly was almost unprecedented. But there was something in the young warrior's voice that commanded attention. "Explain," Thektar commanded. The youngest took a deep breath. "We went expecting to see advanced human technology. Instead, we saw advanced human thinking. Captain Chen didn't win that battle because her weapons were superior. She won because her mind was superior." "Impossible," snorted clan leader Vectos. "Human brains are smaller than ours. Their neural processing speed is documented as being significantly slower than Kithrin standard." "That's exactly the point," the third cub interjected. "We've been measuring the wrong things. We think intelligence means processing speed or memory capacity. Humans think intelligence means adaptation and flexibility." War leader Thektar raised a clawed hand for silence. "You speak of things you do not understand, cubs. Intelligence is well defined. Problem-solving speed, pattern recognition, tactical analysis. By every measure, Kithrins are intellectually superior to humans." "Then why?" the second eldest cub asked quietly. "Are they winning?" The chamber fell silent. It was a simple question, but it cut to the heart of something that had been bothering many of the assembled leaders. In the years since first contact with humanity, human influence in the galaxy had grown exponentially. Trade agreements, research partnerships, defense treaties, all negotiated with a speed and efficiency that had surprised even seasoned diplomats. "They are not winning anything," clan leader Morith declared. "They are simply enthusiastic new members of the galactic community." The fourth cub spoke up for the first time. "With respect, clan leader, how many species had formal alliance agreements with humans before they joined the Galactic Council?" "None, obviously. They were an unknown species, and how many do they have now?" Morith's expression grew uncomfortable. 17 formal alliances, 12 trade partnerships, and 6 research collaborations. In 1 year, the fourth cub pressed. "How long did it take us to establish our first formal alliance?" 43 years, Morith admitted reluctantly. "And how many total alliances do we currently maintain?" 6. The cubs let that information sink in. In a single year, humans had created more galactic partnerships than the Kithrins had managed in over 4 centuries of spacefaring civilization. The youngest cub addressed the chamber again. "War leader, what would you do if a void crawler nest threatened one of our research stations?" Thektar's chest swelled with pride. "We would send a full battle group, 50 of our finest warriors supported by orbital bombardment platforms. We would meet the enemy with honor and destroy them in glorious combat. How many warriors would we lose?" The war leader's expression darkened. "That would depend on their courage and skill. Perhaps 10, perhaps 20, but their deaths would be meaningful, their sacrifice remembered in song." "Captain Chen lost 0 warriors," the eldest cub said, "because she sent only herself." "Because she was reckless," clan leader Vectos protested. "No," the second eldest replied. "Because she was efficient. She accomplished the mission with minimum resource expenditure and 0 casualties. From a strategic perspective, her approach was perfect." The youngest cub looked around the chamber, meeting the golden eyes of some of the most powerful beings in Kithrin society. "We keep talking about what Captain Chen did, but we're missing the important question: why did she do it that way?" "Enlighten us," war leader Thektar said dryly. "She did it that way because that's how humans think about everything. They don't just solve problems, they solve them as efficiently as possible, with maximum results and minimum cost. They don't seek glory or honor or recognition, they seek optimization." The third cub nodded. "When we fight, we're proving ourselves. When humans fight, they're solving equations. And they're very good at math," the fourth added grimly. War leader Thektar leaned back in his throne, his expression thoughtful. Around the chamber, other leaders were whispering among themselves, discussing the implications of what they were hearing. Finally, clan leader Morith voiced the question that everyone was thinking. "If what you say is true, if humans approach everything with this same optimization mindset, what does that mean for our alliance?" The youngest cub answered with the honesty that only youth could provide. "It means we need to make sure we're more valuable as allies than as obstacles." The chamber erupted in angry voices. Several clan leaders rose to their feet, demanding to know how a cub dared suggest that the mighty Kithrin people could ever be considered merely obstacles. But war leader Thektar raised his hand for silence, his ancient eyes fixed on the young warrior who had just articulated the fears that had been growing in his own mind. "Continue," he commanded. The youngest cub swallowed hard but pressed on. "Humans don't make emotional decisions. Captain Chen didn't save those survivors because she felt sorry for them. She saved them because that was part of her mission parameters. Humans help their allies and neutralize their threats based on calculated assessments of benefit and cost. As long as we're beneficial," the eldest added, "we'll be protected and supported. But if we ever become problematic, they'll solve us." The second eldest finished quietly. The chamber fell into a silence so complete that the cubs could hear their own heartbeats echoing off the stone walls. Finally, war leader Thektar spoke. "What do you recommend?" The youngest cub straightened his shoulders, knowing that his next words would determine the future relationship between two civilizations. "We learn from them," he said simply. "We become better allies than they've ever had. And we pray to the ancestor spirits that we never give them a reason to see us as a problem that needs solving." 3 months after their return to Cathera, the cubs received an unexpected summons. Captain Zara Chen had requested permission to visit their homeworld for what human diplomatic communications termed a cultural exchange mission. The High Command, still processing the implications of the cubs' report, had agreed with obvious reluctance. The cubs found themselves assigned as her official escorts, a role that filled them with equal parts excitement and terror. They had spent countless hours since their return analyzing every moment of their previous encounter, trying to understand the deeper implications of what they had witnessed. Now they would have another chance to study the human mindset, this time on their own territory. Zara arrived aboard a modest human transport vessel, accompanied only by a small diplomatic staff. This surprised many Kitharan observers, who had expected a grand display of human military might. Instead, she emerged from her ship wearing simple civilian clothes and carrying what appeared to be nothing more than a standard travel bag. "Welcome to Cathera. Captain Chen," the eldest cub greeted her formally. "Please, just Zara," she replied with that same warm smile they remembered from her interaction with the Torellian child. "I'm here as a guest, not as a soldier." But the cubs had learned to look beyond surface appearances. As they led her through the capital city, they noticed how her eyes constantly moved, cataloging defensive positions, analyzing traffic patterns, and identifying potential escape routes. Even in civilian clothes, even as a diplomatic guest, she was still gathering intelligence. The tour began at the Hall of Echoing Claws, where Zara was formally presented to the High Command. War leader Thektar greeted her with the traditional warrior's salute, which she returned with surprising precision. "Your cubs speak highly of your combat capabilities," Thektar said. "They claim you possess skills that exceed our understanding." Zara glanced at the 5 young Catharans with an expression of mild amusement. "I think they may have misunderstood what they observed. I'm not superhuman. I'm just trained to use human advantages effectively." "What advantages?" Clan leader Morith asked suspiciously. "Human physical capabilities are inferior to ours in every measurable category." "That's true," Zara acknowledged. "But physical capabilities aren't the only factors in combat effectiveness. Humans compensate for our physical limitations through strategic thinking, technological optimization, and something we call force multiplication." The youngest cub perked up.
"What's force multiplication?"
Zara considered how to explain the concept to an alien audience. "It's the ability to make one person as effective as many, or one unit as effective as many units, through superior planning and resource utilization. When I cleared that void crawler nest, I wasn't fighting 23 individual opponents. I was solving a single complex equation with multiple variables." War leader Thektar leaned forward with interest. "Explain this equation." Variable 1. Crawler behavioral patterns and biological weaknesses. Variable 2. Environmental factors that could be weaponized. Variable 3. My own capabilities and limitations. Variable 4. Available resources and escape routes. Zara spoke with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. "Once I understood all the variables, the solution became obvious. And if one of your variables had been incorrect?" asked clan leader Vectos. "Then I would have adapted in real time and calculated a new solution." Zara shrugged. Flexibility is more important than being right the first time. The cubs exchanged glances. This was the same philosophy she had expressed before, but hearing it explained to the high command gave it additional weight. They were witnessing a fundamental difference in how humans and Kitharans approached challenges. As the official ceremonies concluded, the cubs were given permission to show Zara the rest of their world. They took her to the training grounds of valor, where young Kitharan warriors learned the art of combat. Zara watched a group of students practicing traditional dueling forms with obvious interest. The movements were fluid and graceful, emphasizing speed and precision over raw power. After several minutes of observation, she made a request that stunned everyone present. "Would it be possible for me to spar with one of your students? I'd like to understand your techniques better." The training master looked uncertain. "Captain, our methods are designed for Kitharan physiology. A human attempting our forms could be seriously injured." "I understand the risks," Zara replied, "but I learn best through direct experience." The youngest cub stepped forward. "I'll spar with her." The training master protested, but Zara nodded approvingly. "An excellent choice. Your youngest observer has the most flexible mindset." As they prepared for the demonstration, the cubs gathered around the sparring circle along with dozens of curious students and instructors. This would be the first recorded combat between a human and a Kitharan. The rules were simple: traditional weapons, non-lethal contact only. Match ends when one participant yields or is rendered incapable of continuing. The youngest cub chose a curved blade typical of Kitharan dueling styles. Zara selected a straight sword that looked almost primitive in comparison. The match began with the youngest cub displaying the fluid grace that had made Kitharans famous throughout the galaxy. His blade moved in complex patterns, seeking openings while maintaining perfect defensive posture. He was faster than Zara, stronger than Zara, and far more skilled with traditional weapons. He lost in 17 seconds. The cubs watched in shock as Zara systematically dismantled their brother's technique. She didn't try to match his speed or grace. Instead, she used timing, leverage, and positioning to turn his own momentum against him. Every beautiful traditional movement he made was countered by something ugly but effective. When it was over, the youngest cub lay on his back with Zara's blade at his throat, gasping for breath and staring up at her in wonder. "How?" he whispered. Zara helped him to his feet with genuine respect. "You were fighting beautifully." "I was fighting efficiently." Beautiful techniques work well against opponents who also fight beautifully. They're less effective against someone who ignores the rules of beauty and focuses only on victory. The training master approached them with obvious concern. "Captain, what you did, those weren't recognized techniques from any combat discipline we've studied." "They weren't techniques at all," Zara explained. "They were applications of basic physics and leverage principles. I didn't counter your students' moves. I exploited the mechanical disadvantages inherent in his chosen approach." The cubs realized they were witnessing another demonstration of the same principle they had seen on the research station. Humans didn't win through superior skill or strength. They won by changing the nature of the competition itself. As they walked back toward the city center, the eldest cub asked the question that had been bothering him since the sparring match. "Zara, are you here to evaluate us as potential threats?" She stopped walking and turned to face all 5 cubs, her expression serious. "That's a very intelligent question. The honest answer is that every human who interacts with another species is constantly evaluating threat potential. It's not personal, it's just how we're trained to think." "And your evaluation?" the second eldest pressed. Zara smiled, but there was something cold in her eyes. Kitharans are individually superior fighters with a strong warrior culture and advanced technology. You could be dangerous opponents if circumstances ever put us into conflict. The cubs felt their hearts sink. But Zara continued. "However, your approach to problem solving is predictable. Your decision-making processes are honor-bound rather than efficiency-focused. And your strategic thinking is limited by traditional concepts of fairness and direct confrontation." Her smile became warmer. "Which makes you ideal allies and poor enemies. Exactly what we hoped to find." The youngest cub asked the question that all of them had been wondering about since their first meeting. "Zara, why is she human?" The question hung in the air for a moment before Zara understood what he was really asking. "You want to know what makes humans different from everyone else?" she said. "The answer is that we never stop asking, why not?" Every limitation, every tradition, every rule, we question whether it's necessary or just convenient. And when we find something that isn't necessary, we change it. She looked out over the Kithaeron city, with its ancient spires and traditional architecture. Your people built this city to honor your ancestors and preserve your culture. It's beautiful, and it served you well for thousands of years. Humans would look at it and ask, how can we make it better? Not because there's anything wrong with it, but because better is always possible. The cubs walked in silence for several minutes, processing this insight. Finally, the eldest spoke. That's why you're dangerous. Not because you're hostile, but because you're never satisfied. Zara nodded approvingly. Now you're beginning to understand. On Zara's final evening on Kithaeron, the cubs joined her on a hillside overlooking their capital city. The ancient spires caught the light of their setting sun, casting long shadows across the valley below. It was a view that had inspired Kithaeron poets for millennia, speaking to their souls of continuity, tradition, and enduring strength. Zara sat quietly for a long time, studying the scene before them. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of genuine sadness. It's beautiful, she said, really beautiful, and in 100 years it will look exactly the same. The youngest cub frowned. Why does that make you sad? Because beauty without growth is stagnation, and stagnation, in a universe full of threats and challenges, is eventually fatal. She turned to face the 5 young Kithaerons who had become her unlikely students over the past year. I need to tell you something that my government probably wouldn't want you to know. Something that might change how your people view humanity. The cubs leaned forward, sensing the importance of whatever she was about to reveal. When humans first achieved faster-than-light travel, Zara began, we expected to find a galaxy full of civilizations like ours. Species that were constantly innovating, adapting, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Instead, we found peoples who had achieved a comfortable equilibrium and then stopped. She gestured toward the city below. The Kithaerons perfected their warrior culture and stopped evolving it. The Alvanians reached a pinnacle of scientific achievement and became content with incremental progress. The Tyrellians mastered diplomacy and ceased exploring new forms of social organization. What's wrong with that? The third cub asked defensively. Stability has value. Of course it does, Zara agreed. But the universe doesn't reward stability. It rewards adaptation, and humanity has encountered threats out there that would challenge even the most stable civilizations. The eldest cub felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. What kind of threats? Zara was quiet for a long moment, clearly debating how much to reveal. Finally, she seemed to reach a decision. There are things moving in the dark spaces between galaxies. Ancient intelligences that view biological life as an infestation to be cleansed. Machine civilizations that convert entire star systems into computational matrices. Entities that exist partially outside normal space-time and consider our reality to be a temporary inconvenience. The cubs stared at her in horror. Nothing in their education had prepared them for the possibility of such cosmic-scale threats. The galactic civilizations we've encountered, Zara continued, are beautiful and sophisticated and completely unprepared for what's coming. They've optimized for competing with each other, not for surviving truly existential challenges. And humans have? The second eldest asked. Humans are preparing, Zara corrected. We're building alliances, developing technologies, and creating contingency plans for scenarios that most species consider impossible. We're doing this because our entire evolutionary history has taught us one simple lesson: adapt or die. The youngest cub asked the question they were all thinking. Are we going to die? Zara's expression softened, and for a moment they saw past the calculating strategist to something more vulnerable underneath. I don't know, but I do know that our chances improve dramatically if we face these challenges together. She stood up and brushed dust from her clothes. That's why I'm really here. Not to evaluate you as threats, but to help you become partners. Real partners who can contribute to our mutual survival. What would that require? The eldest asked. Change, Zara said simply. Your people would need to embrace the idea that tradition and honor, while valuable, are not as important as continued existence. You would need to accept that sometimes the most honorable thing to do is something dishonorable. You would need to learn to think like humans. The cubs exchanged troubled glances. What Zara was proposing would fundamentally alter Kithaeron society. changing them from the people they had been for thousands of years into something entirely different. And if we refuse, the fourth cub asked. Then you'll remain exactly what you are now, Zara replied. Beautiful, noble, traditional, and ultimately irrelevant when the real challenges begin. The youngest cub stood up and walked to the edge of the hillside, looking down at the city that contained everything he had ever known and loved. When he turned back to Zara, there was a new maturity in his golden eyes. You're not offering us a choice, are you? You're offering us a chance. That's right, Zara confirmed. A chance to matter, to contribute, to survive what's coming. And if we take that chance, then you become more than you ever imagined possible. But you also stop being what you were. The cubs fell silent, contemplating the magnitude of the decision their people would have to make. Finally, the eldest spoke for all of them. When we first met you, we asked ourselves why you were human. Now I think I understand the real question. What's that? The question isn't why you're human. The question is whether we can become human enough to survive. Zara nodded solemnly. That's exactly the right question. As they walked back toward the city together, the cubs realized that their education was complete. They had learned what they came to learn about human military capabilities. But more importantly, they had discovered what it truly meant to be human in a galaxy full of beautiful, doomed civilizations. Behind them, the ancient spires of Kithara caught the last rays of sunlight, casting shadows that would soon give way to darkness. And in that darkness, decisions would be made that would determine whether those spires would still stand when the true test began. The youngest cub looked back once at the city of his ancestors, then turned his face toward the stars where humanity waited with open hands and calculating eyes, offering salvation to those wise enough to grasp it and transformation to those brave enough to accept it. In the end, the cubs understood that was the most human gift of all, the opportunity to become more than you were, even if it meant becoming something you had never intended to be. The future, as always with humans, would be optimal. Whether the Kitharans would be part of that optimized future remained to be seen.